feed our sort of pleasure hormones. Problem is we're overdoing that bit and underdoing the nourishment bit. And the calories in, calories out idea is just too simplistic. I've chosen here two sorts of foods that have roughly the same calorific value, but I hope you'd agree with me that there's going to be an awful lot more nutrition in that vegetable curry than there is in the donut. But you could eat your 2,000 calories a day, which is the sort of typical amount that particularly women are advised to eat on a daily basis. You could eat it all in donuts, but that's not going to do you any good. You're going to become maybe overfed but undernourished because you won't be getting all the vitamins and important nutrients from that donut. The vegetable curry is going to be a much better use of your 260 odd calories. So we'd rather people don't get obsessed about the calorific value of foods more than nutritious value. And basically carbohydrates are empty calories. They don't offer the body an awful lot in the way of nourishment. They might give you a little bit of energy, but if you're overeating them, that energy is going to get stored as fat in your body. And that, of course, is the way the body was designed to work, for feast and famine, because our forefathers didn't have the certainty of food being available that we have today. And therefore, we're designed to store a bit of fat when we overeat so that we can cope with the periods when we undereat. But today, very few of us are undereating at all. So we've really got to be looking at what nourishment we're taking on board. So the Public Health Collaboration's answer to the Eat Well plate is this diagram, where we really want people to concentrate on eating good protein and healthy fats that occur naturally, not processed oils and fats, but fats that occur in nature, be it animal or vegetable. And the carbohydrates that we encourage you to eat are the naturally occurring ones, those that you will find in vegetables, and a little bit of fruit. I'll talk a little bit more about fruit in a moment, but really we should be getting most of our nutrients from things that occur in nature, not processed in a factory. Oops. So no to the Eat Well guide, and please try and base what you eat on the diagram there. And just to further illustrate how bad so many of the processed foods are, a wonderful GP called Dr. David Unwin, who is one of the pioneers in this country for looking at low carb and working with his diabetic patients and having terrific success, not because he found out about it in the first place. One of his patients sorted herself out, and then after she'd sorted herself out, came to see him, and he could not believe how well she was, how much weight she'd lost, and how well her diabetes was controlled. So he found out what she'd been doing, and that tweaked an interest in his own head, and he went off and researched it, and now he's one of the main proponents in the country for low carb management. And he came up with this lovely pictorial idea of helping people to be able to see what common foods, how much sugar, the things that we eat and are being hoodwinked into believing are healthy for us. Now, can I just point out that these breakfast cereals here, they are talking about 30-gram portions. This is minuscule. Most people are probably eating 3 times that amount. And yet, if you eat these common breakfast cereals, you're having anywhere between 4 or 5 up to 10 teaspoons of sugar. And that's not counting the milk that you might be having with it as well, which has a little bit of lactose in. So that'll be adding even more sugar. If you combine that with a piece of toast, maybe with some jam or marmalade on it, then you're absolutely raking up the sugar to maybe a level of 25 to 30 teaspoons of sugar just for your breakfast. But he's produced these sort of charts now for lots of common foods. And unfortunately, I know many of you are probably keen on rice. You eat a lot of rice. A standard sort of 150-gram portion of rice contains all these teaspoons of sugar, over 10. What happens is when every time you have a really carb-loaded meal, it spikes your blood sugar, causes this outpouring of insulin, which drives the sugar, if you're still insulin sensitive, into your cells, and very quickly you will be hungry again. But unfortunately, when this is happening over and over again, your insulin, the insulin resistance, should I say, develops, and that sugar is not going into your tissues, it's staying in your blood where it's doing an awful lot of harm. So we really do need to pay attention to how much of this sugar is floating around and try to reduce how much we're putting into the body in the first place, and that helps greatly for the body to function more efficiently. And even some of the fruits, I said I'd talk a bit more about fruit. The banana is hailed as the wonderful snack. Unfortunately, you know, you almost might as well eat a Mars bar in terms of how much sugar is going to go into your bloodstream as a result of eating that banana. Grapes are another thing that's very easy to eat a lot of because they're sweet and they're really tasty, but they as well contain a lot of sugar. The berries at the bottom end, strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, all of those have got a very high fiber content, gram for gram, and therefore less of that sugar gets absorbed by the body. So they are healthier fruits to eat. So when we talk about eating fruits on a low carb diet, we're really referring mostly to the berries. So what we encourage people to eat is the best quality real food that you can afford. So when we talk about real food, we talk about stuff that is as nature produced it, not a factory. So if you can tolerate and you are able to eat dairy, dairy is very healthy. Eggs are one of nature's most perfect foods, highly nutritious, and a great speedy food to prepare if you're after a quick breakfast or a quick snack lunch or whatever. And then I appreciate many of you may be vegetarian, but if you're not vegetarian, then fresh meat. And again, we want to encourage sustainable farming. So I'd rather eat less meat and buy it from a free range butcher rather than factory produced. Poultry, fish, seafood, all of these are highly nutritious. All vegetables that grow above the ground will have very little carbohydrate in them. We need to watch the root vegetables, those that grow below the ground, because as they are roots, they do store a lot of energy as carbohydrate, and therefore they are slightly more high carb than the leafy vegetables. So we need to keep control over how much of those we eat. When it comes to fats, fats do not do you any harm if they are naturally occurring fats. So butter, ghee, lard, all of those naturally occurring animal-based fats are fine. Olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, cold-pressed oils are very, very healthy. Seed oils that have been produced in a factory, I love the way they call them vegetable oils. I haven't seen many vegetables that actually contain oil. So it's the seeds that are ground down and processed with all sorts of chemicals that produce vegetable oil, and these are truly harmful. So we want to avoid those as much as possible. And then, as I mentioned, small amounts of fruit and berries. Beware of the very, very sweet fruits, the tropical fruits. They are basically nature's candy. And the manufacturers know how much of a sweet tooth the human being has, and they have cultivated their fruits over the last few decades to be sweeter and sweeter. I think if many of us ate an apple that existed when our parents were alive, we would not like it because it would be very bitter to us. So unfortunately, the sweeter fruits have got even sweeter in recent decades, and therefore are even more disastrous for us to eat. So avoid all processed foods. Foods that are made in a factory, really be careful. Tinned and frozen foods are fine if they are as much in their natural state as possible. I mean, frozen vegetables are usually more nutritious than fresh because they've been frozen within hours of being picked and they've had nothing else added to them. Tinned vegetables, just be careful that they're the ones that are in water, not anything that contains all sorts of other sugars and salts and things. Check the ingredient list, and if there's more than 5 ingredients, you really want to be thinking about avoiding, because particularly if there are words on the ingredients list that you cannot read or understand, these are all chemicals and all sorts of nasties that we really don't need in our bodies. Vegetable oils, as I've mentioned, we should absolutely avoid. Unfortunately, and again, we need to be looking at using nut flours and so forth for baking rather than wheat-based flours, because they are very high carb and very quickly get broken down into sugar. So wheat-based flour products, bread and pasta, unfortunately, are not great. Other starchy carbs are also going to be causing those spikes in blood sugar. So we need to be looking at reducing those, or if we're diabetic, replacing them with things like cauliflower rice and other less starchy foods that can take the place of the rice in the dishes. This is a nice chart. As I say, I'll make these slides available so you can pick up these bits of information. But this chart with the green, amber and red really puts the foods into groups of what we should be eating lots of, what we should have in moderate amounts, and what we should try to avoid altogether if we possibly can. I find with people I'm advising about weight loss, this is not people who've got diabetes, but people who just want to lose weight, that once they've achieved the weights that they're happy and comfortable with, then adopt the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the time you're eating from the green and the amber, and then occasionally for treats, you can have one or two of the banned substances, as I call them in our house. So the take-home message here is focus on meals consisting of natural, nutrient-dense foods and avoid snacking. We really do not need to be eating every couple of hours. And in fact, there's lots of research now going on what we call intermittent fasting, where we only eat twice or even sometimes once a day. Our bodies are well able to cope with that. It's really come from the manufacturers of all these snacks, the idea that we need to be eating constantly. Our bodies function better if we have nice big gaps between our meals. But intermittent fasting is a talk for another day, but focus on your main meals, making them nutrient dense, and then you won't be hungry in between meals. Avoid the processed foods. Forget the calories in, calories out model. Exercise is really, really important for your general health. It's incredibly important, but you cannot outrun a bad diet. So don't think because you've been for a nice walk today or you've been to the gym, you can go and tuck into those high carb treats. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. And if there's more than 5 ingredients on the label, probably best to not put it back on the shelf. There are lots of good websites now that have a huge amount of information on low carb eating. PHC, the organisation I represent, has got its own website with quite a bit of information, but Ditch the Carbs, Diet Doctor. Now, Diet Doctor is a particularly good website with a huge amount of information. Fat is My Friend is run by a GP up this end of the country near Warrington, and the Low Carb Kitchen is another one that's run by somebody who's had success with low carb eating and is very useful and educational. There are some fantastic films for you to watch as well to get a bit of motivation and inspiration, and I've listed just a few on here, but you will get links to many more, particularly on Diet Doctor. So that was really all I wanted to say, and I'm more than happy to take questions now, but I know we've also got the GP online who wants to say a few words as well. So I'll hand over, stop sharing my screen and hand back to the chair.
Thank you. That was very interesting.
Good.
Anna, are you able to allow?
Thank you very much again, Caroline. That was really interesting. Also, what we were thinking is, it's echoing, isn't it? What I was also thinking is, if people in our groups, if all the ladies and gentlemen who really want to lose weight, I'm willing to open another group, and with your help and Davina and Tracy and Hugo, would you able to guide us to lose weight?
Absolutely. We're doing a lot of this now. I mean, our ideal is to run face-to-face meetings, which we were doing in the public health collaboration prior to lockdown. But a lot of us have now got good Zoom meetings going, and, you know, it can work very well, especially if we have slightly smaller numbers perhaps than we've got tonight, because it allows for a bit more interaction and sharing of stories and problems and issues and so forth. But yeah, I think public health collaboration very much wants to get as many support groups going as possible to encourage people to, you know, it's always important, but it's never been more important than it is at the current time for people to get their weight under control and to prevent diabetes.
Yes, sitting at home with this COVID, not able to go out for gym or walks, or walks is restricted for some as well. So for me, example, I can't walk anyway, but a diet like this would help me to reduce wherever I need to reduce. So it will be really appreciative if you can help us out.
Yeah.
If there's any Q&As, Tracy, Davina?
Yeah. People are asking what fruits are good for diabetics.
Sorry, can you say that again?
What fruits are good for diabetics?
Fruit.
Yeah. I mean, shall we do it before we answer the question? Shall we just let Dr. Kesar just say what you want to do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hannah, are you able to give Dr. the access to present?
They need to mute themselves, unmute themselves.
Yes, I'm unmuted. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Brilliant. Is it worthwhile me sharing the screen as well? Then I think, Caroline, that's an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. And I think mine will probably carry on for the Asian population following what you've actually said. And I will say straight away, I totally support everything that Caroline has said so far. And it is equally applicable to our ethnic minority population. And I hope I can add on a little bit more focused points to support that. Now, if I share my screen and let's see whether it works. Right. Does it work? Multiple. Can you see that?
Yeah, we
Brilliant.
can.
Yes.
Okay. I'll try to be as quick as I can, but forgive me if it goes on for an extra few minutes. I hope it'll be very relevant and you'll be interested. Okay, so how do I turn this on?
You have to use the arrows at the bottom. Yeah.
There we are. Okay, this is the size of the problem. Okay, in the UK, 4% of the UK population are diabetic, up to 6%. If you look at it overall, but sorry, 4% of the UK population are South Asians, but 8% of the diabetics are Asians. Okay, it's 6 times more likely in our South Asian population than the Caucasians. And one of the things that's associated with it is the high risk of cardiovascular disease, the heart disease. I won't go into prevalence, why, because that's a different talk. But this is a slide which really hits it on the head. The second column from the bottom, over the space of about 34 years, there has been a 442% increase in diabetics in patients from the Indian subcontinent. That's how much it's grown, and it's growing. It is very, very high, and it's very important. I've got a practice of just over 10,500 patients. 90% of them are from the South Asian population. 12% of the whole practice, which is from birth up to 101 years, is diabetic at the moment. If you just look at the adults over 17 years of age, 22% of them are either diabetics or pre-diabetics. And if you go up higher up to the age of 65 to 75, nearly 60%, so that's 6 out of every 10 patient is either a diabetic or a pre-diabetic. Diabetes prevalence is 47% in the 65-year-olds in my practice. And you got the graph on the right-hand side, which just summarizes how it shoots up. I was just looking at, this is a slide from about 4 years ago. It's got worse in the last 4 years, okay? The patients are getting younger. I've got 18-year-olds, Asians, who are getting type 2 diabetes. And so that's one thing. Now, this is the other reason why it's so important. Diabetes type 2 is probably one of the commonest causes for amputations, one of the commonest causes of blindness, commonest cause of heart attacks, kidney failure, strokes. You know, I mean, that's how big the problem is, and that's how it's affecting the individual cases and also the whole society at the moment. Now, how can you address this? Caroline's actually summarized it beautifully. The bottom line is not anything else apart from nutrition. Nutrition has, the bad nutrition has contributed to the obesity epidemic. Type 2 diabetes goes hand in hand in that. So these are the kind of things that we as Asians can try to focus on. Flour-based foods, Chapatis, rotis, naans, parathas, breads, rolls, pita breads, pastas, pizzas, biscuits, cakes, familiar in every household. Rice, potatoes, very substantial in our curries and our meals. Cereals, it's the popular thing that everybody wants to have because it's a healthy cereal in the morning. You must have breakfast, you must have your porridge or your Weetabix or shredded wheats, etc. I'll come down to show you in a graph so it's easy to understand what that causes to your sugar. Caroline is also focused on fruits. The other thing is drinks, juices. Apple juice, orange juice from a cartoon, supposed to be very healthy, but it contains a hell of a lot of sugar. Okay, I'll just move on. I won't go into the other green bits. These are the kind of things that we can make choices on. These are the kind of things that are low in carbohydrates. The general vegetables, the leafy vegetables that Caroline mentioned above ground, which is substantial in our curries, the dals, although they contain a significant amount of carbohydrates as to the usage, I actually believe that part of that is the fiber, so it's healthy. It's not as dense as the processed foods that we sometimes indulge in. So dals, and it's such a basic part of our culture, the Asians, that if you start taking the chapatis and the dals away, I think we're going to have a riot. People will be saying, well, what can you eat? So I'll just include that in there. Eggs, meat, fish, cheese, salads, natural yogurt, that homemade yogurt that grandma and mum used to make at the house. It all needs to come in, but not the flavored yogurts that you can get from Tesco's and Safeways, etc., etc. Ghee is back in, definitely back in, because it's natural, it's healthy, it is a million times better than the vegetable oils that are being sold out there for cooking. Right, an example. This is a diabetic, type 2 diabetic, healthy. He eats healthy porridge one day in the morning, and look what happens to the blood sugar. The one in blue, okay, it shoots up to 16 to 17 millimoles, which is way high. Toast, bread, 2 slices of bread does the same thing. 2 slices of bread has an equivalent of about 6 spoonfuls of sugar, as Caroline said. Porridge bowlful, same thing. Cornflakes, again, shoots up to 20 millimoles. A bowl full of cornflakes is about 7 to 8, maybe 9 spoonfuls of sugar, depending on the size. Again, same thing. Bread, there are different types. You know, you can have the normal bread, which everybody has. Then there's a fancy one called Persian soya and linseed bread. It contains less carbohydrates, more of flaxseed, and it's also got soya, which doesn't contain carbohydrates so much. This is graphs of the same person on 3 successive days, their blood sugars. The top one, green, is the normal cheese, egg on toast. Okay, normal bread. The red one, where the rise is not that high, is the soya and linseed bread. However, the blue one, where the sugar stays more or less the same over the next 4 hours after eating it, is tuna with salad. That's how dramatic you can improve your diabetes, your sugar control. Have salad with the stuff rather than bread. The other thing is that if you're really feeling adventurous and you're desperate to have slices of bread, normal bread contains, as I said, 3, sometimes 4 spoonfuls of sugar with each slice. Almond flour doesn't. Very minimal amount of carbohydrates in there. It is healthier, but it is obviously a lot more difficult to make the bread. You need to experiment, and it's not so readily available. So that's where the difficulty is. But if you can get it, all well and good. Chapatis, mainstay in our culture, apart from rice and chapatis. So 1 chapati, average size, contributes nearly 6 spoonfuls of sugar once it's digested. So the average person has two chapatis with their meals. That's 12 spoonfuls of sugar. You need to have alternatives. You can either try, ideally give up or minimize the amount of chapatis you have. But if you're really desperate, then there are alternatives of the flour, which is a little bit more difficult to make the chapatis, but they have much healthier benefits. You can mix the flour. You can end up having partly soya atta, which is very, very minimal in carbohydrates, also, although some authorities do not recommend it. But if you mix it up with wheat flour and or besan or chickpea flour, it'll lower the carbohydrate content. And the chickpea flour, the besan flour, contains more proteins, and that helps to improve the actual absorption, what we call the glycemic index. It slows down the absorption, so it helps with the diabetes in that manner. Commercially, there is a flour that one of the medical doctors has contributed in forming, and it's available on Amazon. It's called fiber flour. It contains 1/3 of the quantity of carbohydrates as the normal wheat flour. So it's well worthwhile trying that. Now, this is what happens with 2 chapatis with a vegetable curry, which is full of potatoes and some dal. In this particular example patient who's a diabetic, he has 2 chapatis with his meal curries in the evening, and his blood sugar shoots up to about 11 to 12, and it stays up until about 2:30 in the morning. This is important because the majority of the time our Asians tend to eat the main meal with the chapatis in the evening when they come back from work or they're having their family meal, and then they sit down and then go to bed. The sugar stays high for a long time. Now, if you actually just change the flour of your chapatis or miss out the chapatis and cut out the potatoes, this is the kind of difference the same person has. See the blue line at the bottom? That is what their sugar is with the same sort of chapati and dal meal, but changing the flour and the chapatis and the potatoes. And that is the kind of thing that you can achieve without medication. Right. If you have no chapatis, but for the people who actually eat meat, they can have their vegetable curries and the meat curries, but with salad, no chapatis, the blood sugar remains more or less level throughout, without medications. But if they have chapatis with meat, a bit more fat, then again, the chapatis shoots up the sugar to about 20, but without the chapatis, it is flat, okay? Now, the other thing is rice. This slide just gives you a small proportion of rice. It contains about 80 grams of carbohydrates. About 100 grams of wheat flour for chapatis contains about 65 to 70% grams of carbohydrates. So it's more or less the same, chapatis or rice. Now, if you're not having chapatis or rice, what can you have? This I show to my patients. For the people who eat meat, their mouth is drooling. You know, this lovely chicken curry with dal, etc., with salad at the bottom. Chop up the salad, whatever you want in there. It's healthy, natural foods, and you put in whatever curry you want to put on top. If you are vegetarian, you can have your vegetable curries and the salad and the dals. It tastes just as nice, does not raise the sugar. Karela or bitter gourd is a very commonly used and familiar vegetable in Asian curries, Asian continent. And this is what happens using Karela. This chap had 2 pita breads with their curry on one day and a different curry the next day. But the third day, he ended up having Karela or bitter gourd with it, curry, and that's how flat his sugar level was. The Karela or bitter gourd does contain ingredients which helps with sugar control. That's why some of the patients tend to have gorillas with their salads or their juices in the morning with their meals. It does help to some degree. It may not help to the same extent with everybody, but it's well worthwhile trying. Then specifics, pasta. Everybody loves their pasta these days, but this is what happens with pasta. Remember the graph with the chapatis and the rice and the cereals? Same sort of pattern, up to 20, blood sugar goes up to about 20. Same sort of pattern with pasta. It is no better. Pizzas, everybody's favorite meal on Friday evening with the family, you know, but this is what happens with the pizza because it's made with the flour, a lot of it, it just shoots up the sugar through to the night until the early hours of the morning, up to 26 to 27 value of blood sugar, you know. So Brotas is a little bit mixed because it contains K, which slows down the GI, the absorption a little bit. But the main reason for bringing this out now is that eating the main meal, we're all used to eating the main meal in the evening. But if you have a prota in the morning, you're up and about, you're using it up, it won't have the same effect as if you have it at night time. In the morning, it would have gone up for about 3-4 hours. At night time, it will stay up for a lot longer because that's your main meal. It'll be a heavier meal. So be careful, have your lighter meal at night time and certainly minimal carbohydrates at night time. That will help you. Right, specifics. Protein in food or natural fats helps to slow down the absorption of the carbohydrates and reduces the conversion or slows down the conversion to blood sugar. So if you have your carbohydrates with meat, protein, or with say ghee, it will be a little bit slower, the absorption. It can help a little bit. I'm not advocating that you have lots of fat. I'm not advocating that you have lots of carbohydrates mixed up with the fat. That's a disaster. Having carbohydrates with fat is certainly a disaster because it produces more fat inside the body, which will have adverse effect. This is just an example that if you were to have carbohydrates, having protein or something else with it rather than the cakes, etc., it may help with slowing down the absorption of the sugar and might help with a little bit with your blood sugar profile. Now, squashes. Everybody loves their ribenas and their orange squashes, but if they contain the normal sugars, it will shoot up the sugar inside you. And this is an example of a chap whose sugar control was so good, but in the hot summer, he started having Vimto every day, 3-4 times a day, because he was thirsty and it was hot. And his sugar control, when I checked it, was absolutely awful. He stopped the Vimto and everything came down within a few weeks. Exercise, Caroline mentioned, it is important, okay? It is important for several reasons, not just to help a little bit with the blood sugar control, but more important for the general body toning up and healthiness, as well as for the mental health well-being. This example is somebody having porridge in the morning, breakfast, his sugar shoots up to 14, but if he goes out for a walk, half an hour walk, you can see the sugar plummeting down in that half an hour. He has the Weetabix in the morning, which is like porridge and bread, etc., but it shoots down within the half an hour. And this is a 75-year-old gentleman, and it was so good that when he came back later on in the morning after his walk, he helped his wife by doing the hoovering. And even that activity is helping, you know? Activity, exercise does help. The next day he was shoveling up the snow in his front garden. And again, exercise, activity It helps bring it down after eating. Yeah. What happens during the daytime? This is a younger chap who indulged at having bhatures, chanas, jalebi, etc. And his sugar starts shooting up to about 16. And it stays up for about 4 hours. But the next weekend, I told him to go for a walk after the same sort of meal. And guess what? It didn't go up there like before. It's actually stayed down, stable. So exercise, and it need only be walking. That's all you need to do. After meals helps a lot with you controlling your sugars. This is my version of the Amber Light diet sheet. The good foods, the not so good foods, the bad foods. But I'd just like to maybe end on this. Which one would you prefer? Everybody will say yes, but there'll be a few cheeky people who will say this, the roti or the bun. And it's more the bun, but it's convenient, this. This is very convenient. So it's fast food, easy to prepare. This is a lot more difficult and longer to eat as well as prepare. So you need to put effort into your food. You do need to put effort into your food to get the healthy benefits out of it. Okay? If there's any questions,
suddenly तो मेरा mood disturb होगा. जैसे हमने और उसको हमने कहा obviously I'll get disturbed. Then we said obviously I'll get disturbed.
I think that's about it from me.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. That's very kind. Thank you very much. So I'll just quickly read out some of the questions.
Thank you very much.
There's a lot of questions.
Thank you very much.
There's a lot of questions around pulses and grains, like what's allowed, whole grain, millet, flour, are pulses okay? Bananas, some people are talking about bananas. Is keto diet any good? Navin's asking. Caroline, do you want to answer that?
Well, keto really just means a very, very low carb diet. You've kind of got low carb, moderate low carb, and very low carb. A keto diet, you really need to be having so little carbs that you have to use your body fat for energy, and then that produces a substance in the blood called ketones. So in order to get into that state, it's very effective at losing weight rapidly, but you've really got to be eating virtually no carbohydrates at all. For diabetic control, just going low carb will usually help. Moderately low carb, which is under 130 grams, under 130 grams of carbs a day, works well for most people. But I think one of the things most of us are learning is that people are very, very different. And therefore, they've kind of got to do a little bit of trial and error. But really, don't worry about keto in the sense that it's just an extreme low carb diet. It's the same principle, but just very low carb.
There's a few other people who've asked about cereals and lentils, saying.
Can I ask a question to Dr. Sandra, please?
Yep.
Did I hear and got an impression from this talk and the slides and illustrations that eating porridge in the morning is stuffing yourself with a lot of carbohydrate, because porridge is a slow releasing carbohydrate. So one would have thought that that is a perfectly healthy diet.
Yeah. Okay. General principle. The general principle is that all cereals, virtually all cereals, contain a high amount of carbohydrates. The different cereals might release the carbohydrates slower, and that's where the porridge comes in, and it's the raw stone cut porridge that we used to make in the traditional way of with the milk and the ghee in there. It did release sugar a lot more slowly. But if you look at the quantity of the carbohydrate that is actually totally released, it is not that dissimilar. And whether I always preach to my patients that porridge, Weetabix, even shredded wheats were the healthier cereals. If you're a non-diabetic, I would totally agree with that if you want to have cereals. But as a type 2 diabetic, I think there is significant amounts of carbohydrate in there. And I've just shown you the example of what happens with the blood sugar just with porridge. And these days, majority of the people tend to have that, the convenient, quick, microwavable, or the sachets of porridge, which are a little bit more refined and not the original porridge that we were used to in the older generation.
No, I was referring to the old-fashioned Scots porridge, which is the naturally rolled foam. And as a non-diabetic, that has been part of our ritual every day.
And I think, and I agree with that, that is a little bit better, but underneath it all, I don't believe it is really the right thing for diabetics, because it does push the sugar up. If you can do without it, I think you're going to be on to a winner. If you can't do without the breakfast, then that is one of the better options out of the bad bunch. That's my belief.
So what would you say, how much of porridge cooked in a meal for a breakfast would be an ideal portion for a non-diabetic?
That again, I think Caroline might have mentioned it. The responses onto the different foods can be a little bit variable depending on the severity of the diabetes that you have got, etc. But my own feeling is that avoiding, if at all possible, avoiding cereals altogether is useful. That's the ideal. The next best thing is to reduce the quantities as much as you can accept. That is better. And the third thing is that if you really can't do without cereals, then the smaller the better for you. That's my belief. Caroline, have you got anything to add on that?
I agree. I mean, if people have access to being able to monitor their blood sugar for a little while, it can be quite helpful, because some people are lucky and they can tolerate porridge, or they can tolerate rice, or they can tolerate a banana quite well, whereas other people find that those things shoot up their blood sugar. But the general rule of thumb is that cereals, they are basically carbohydrate foods, even if they're slow release. And you know, modern, unfortunately, versions that we have accessible to us today are just not the same as the ones our fathers ate, and they are not going to be good for us. So I would agree that if you have to have it once a week, but please don't have it every day, and small portions. But
small portion, yeah.
Small portion.
Dr. Sadra, could I perhaps ask you a question about the effect on your cholesterol? I've been sort of following the public health collaboration for about 2.5 years. I'm of Asian origin. I have parents that are type 2 diabetics with cardiovascular sort of illnesses. I'm sort of in my late 40s. I'm not particularly overweight. I don't have any diabetes yet, but I'm basically want to prevent having those type of illnesses that I'm prone to. So although I've not been following a very strict low carbohydrate diet, I have reduced my carbohydrate, and I have increased my healthy natural fats and somewhat protein and vegetables. And on a yearly basis, I have had my lipids, my cholesterol checked by my GP, who's kindly done that for me. And I've noticed that my total cholesterol has gone up, although my HDL, which is the good cholesterol, has gone up as well, and my triglycerides have gone down. So although my total cholesterol's gone up, and my say my non-HDL cholesterol's also gone up, I think overall the profile is better. But because I'm not very new to low carbohydrate, but I know my GP is, and also because of my family history of the effects that I've said, I'm still a little bit twitchy about my profile, and I have read that it's better to look at perhaps the HDL triglyceride ratio, which, you know, I presume it's just a division that you do, and there's a range which I'm not quite sure of what it is, but I was just wondering what you could say or comment on something like that, because I was reading up that, you know, if you do feel that there is a underlying sort of cardiac issue, then you would go on to sort of do further testing, like apolipoprotein levels, which are not available on the NHS. I know that, but I just wonder if you had a few words to say about that kind of effect, because you'll have Asian patients that have done maybe low carbohydrate diets, and you're monitoring their lipids and what you advise and what you suggest.
Right. I think this is very much a changing and slowly changing field across the board. It's taken a long time for people to come on board with this. What we have realized, and a significant number, and the numbers growing, is that saturated fats, which has previously been popularized as being the very bad fats, and are associated with raised LDL values in the blood, have been correlated with coronary artery disease and atherosclerosis in the past. There is a big history as to how that sort of belief has come through, which is for another day. But there's been a lot of challenge over the last 30 to 40 plus years. And the number of scientists who actually oppose that view has grown immensely, particularly over the last few years. As regards the measurements that you're talking about, GPs and the medical profession as a whole are still following guidelines which have been almost sort of cemented over the last 40 years from the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry. But what we've discovered is that total cholesterol itself, up to about 7 to 8, is probably not that relevant in risk. HDL, the good cholesterol, and the triglycerides are probably the two most important aspects of the cholesterol profile. The LDL cholesterol is not something that is directly measurable. It is calculated. It's a theoretical calculation. Whatever, you know, whenever we get these results, the LDL, the supposed bad cholesterol, is not the measurable part of that profile. It's the HDL and the triglycerides which are measured. And improving or increasing the HDL and lowering the triglycerides are the most important beneficial changes in our cholesterol profile. Yes, there is a breakdown of the very low density cholesterol and the LDLs, but that I think is a little bit more of work in progress at the moment with the different parts, especially because in general practice, you can't get the breakdown of the apoproteins and the other parts of the LDL. So I think from the measurements point of view, focus more on the benefits of increasing the HDL and lowering the triglycerides, and low carbohydrates are the one thing that is the one change that actually improves both of those factors. Caroline, is there anything else to add on that?
No, I totally agree. I think it sounds like this lady's going in absolutely the right direction. Yeah. And, you know, Asim Malhotra and Malcolm Kendrick are two people that might be worth, and Zoe Harcum are worth finding some of their work who explain it even better. Yeah. But actually there's a greater mortality rate in people with very low cholesterol than there is in people with high cholesterol on the whole. So as you know, been pointed out, this is a huge medical debate, but there's lots of evidence to show that we're focusing far, far too much on total cholesterol and not looking at the important aspects. And the very best way to lower your triglycerides, because all that fat I mentioned in my talk that collects in your liver, that's your triglycerides. Mm-hmm. And when you go low carb, you dramatically reduce that, and that helps your triglycerides. So it sounds to me like you're going in absolutely the right direction.
That's
The
great.
the one thing I'd just like to add on to that is, you know, our body does not rebuild, or the cells don't rebuild or repair or form immunity from carbohydrates. They don't.
It's not
Carbohydrates are non-essential. You can live a good life with zero carbs. But the one of the most important things that a body needs is fats, the essential fats. And the essential fats contribute to cholesterol. Cholesterol contributes to the repair of cells and the building of cells, making the hormones, making the neurological transmitters, etc., etc. If you deplete the body of cholesterol, it will have adverse effects. Okay.
Thanks very much. That's been very helpful. I have seen some of your videos and slides before about, postprandial exercise and things, and I've tried to show it to my husband on several.
I'm sorry, Majida, this is not fair that you're taking all the conversation.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The other question was on lentils.
Thank you. We've only got about 10 minutes left. So a small, quick question. If there is, Davina, do you want to read it out? Because if we give it to the people, then it's going to take a long time.
Talking about fats and flours, like millet. People mention millet a lot. Whether that's good for you, but I think that's quite high carb. Really, you could just have things like if you eat more, instead of chapatis and stuff, if you eat more salads and things and more sort of vegetables. Eggs are very good. Somebody was asking about eggs. Carolyn?
Nuts, flours are all very good. The trouble is they're very energy dense. So
Can I also just point out that majority of us are vegan over here, vegetarians.
Okay.
So let's concentrate what they can take.
Yes.
The nut flours, as I said, are a very useful substitute to the wheat flours. You just have to remember that if you're trying to lose weight, whilst they're low in carb, they're quite high in the natural fats, and so they're very energy dense. However, they tend to produce products that are more satisfying. It is harder to find good recipes for vegans because a lot of the non-wheat flour recipes for breads and so forth contain eggs. But there are some recipes out there that work quite well for vegans using other products that substitute for eggs. But there's always something that you can replace the high carb foods with. Unfortunately, as the doctor mentioned, it is more labor intensive. And I think any healthy eating plan requires planning and organization. And we as a society have got used to things that we can just grab quickly. And we've really got to think our nutrition is so important to our life that that's something we need to devote some time to. And put priority back on healthy eating, and it can mean planning and preparation.
Just going back to the flours, people, a lot of the patients have read up or have been advised that millet is good, maybe the barley is good, and all the other flours. But in general, the carbohydrate content of these flours, whether it's maize, mukki, corn flour, or whether it's wheat, or whether it's millet, whether it's barley, etc., is between 60 to 70% carbohydrates. That's the vast majority. There might be a difference of about maybe 5% here or there, but there isn't a substantial difference.
Yeah, I think the main thing is to sort of keep your carbs low, like keep it 40 to 50, is that right?
Yeah.
It depends. I mean, under 100 is good, under 100 grams a day, and under 50, you'll really see some progress. But that's harder to achieve at the beginning. So I think if people are eating a very carby lifestyle, then getting to under 100 grams is they'll see a big benefit.
I'll just give you examples of two patients that I've actually, they're hot off the press. That's the reason why I'm actually quite excited about this, is that, we see in our Asians, maybe the most undisciplined sector as a generalization is the young men who are out on the town, who enjoy their living, etc. And you think they're going to be the most difficult to manage with this sort of thing. I've had 3 examples in the last 3 months of between the ages of 26 and 35, new diabetics with an HbA1c of over 100 who have just enjoyed their food, low carbohydrate food, over 3 months have managed to reduce their HbA1c from over 100 down to below 50. And they're eating well and they're enjoying their life, but they've cut out the carbs. They can still have a very healthy, natural lifestyle with food. Davina, you're on mute.
I was just going to say, you actually feel less hungry if you're eating less carbohydrates.
Yep.
If you're eating more of the fats, everyone's fearing fats, but if you're eating more things like ghee and coconut oil and things like that, that actually fills you up. You don't feel as hungry. I know I've done it myself. So, and my sugar level was 43 and it's dropped down to 35. And I don't do strict low carb. I'm just like making sure I do a bit of intermittent fasting, and being careful what I eat. Mostly eating real foods. I mean, there are support groups. I think Panna was saying that she was thinking of setting up a support group, and Carolyn, myself, and Daksha would be willing to help out in supporting that. And Doctor, if he can be our guest speaker whenever we need to reach out, if he's available.
Fine.
Thank you very much to Carolyn and Dr.
Thank you very much from Women to Women for Caroline, Dr. Sandra, Davina, and Tracy, and Hugo. We really do appreciate for you to put this time in for us. As I said, majority of us are vegetarian and vegan. Some of them are very vegan. So we are going to set up this group. We are very keen to lose weight, and we're going to seek your advice as you guide us. We'll really appreciate it, how and when you tell us to do it. So I'll set up a group as soon as I can and get in touch with you to, direct us.
Okay.
I really appreciate it. Davina, thank you very much for putting your effort in. Davina actually supports PHC ambassadors, and Daksha Jopan Putra is also nutrition and health MSc.
Are part of the PHC group. Dr. Sadra, Carolyn, Daksha Joban Patra, and myself. We're all part of the PHC organization. That website's got a lot of information about how to get with the healthy eating.
Thank you very much. Tracy, I will have that glass of wine from your partner.
Got to go a long way.
I think I need it now. Thank you very much. Shall I say my prayers to say good night? Hold on.
Thank you.
Om Satama Satagamaya Tumsoma Jyoti Gamaya Mrutyumaya Mrutam Gamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Shanti 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 Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We, from Women to Women, we really appreciate for every participant who attended, and I'm hoping that you all thoroughly digested what our specialists have advised us, and we're going to try and follow them and be thin like them, say within a month or 2. No, seriously, we really appreciate it. Thank you very much from Women to Women. We'd like to call you again on a different subject, because I know you've got loads of subjects to carry on. I
Thank
wish we
you.
had more time today, but we are really struggling with time. Everybody's running away.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night, all. Stay
Good night.
safe. Pandemic
Thank
is
you.
getting worse. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
All.
everybody.
Good night.
Really.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Panna. Jai Shri Krishna.
Thank you,
everybody.
Panna. Jai Shri Krishna.
Jai Shri Krishna.
Thank
Bye.
you
all.
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jai Shri Krishna.
Jai Shri
Thank you.
Krishna.
Jai Shri
Jai Shri
Krishna.
Krishna.
Thank you.